Dear church, let's talk about prepping to preach.
Dear church, let's talk Holy Spirit, transformation, prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is now Christ.
My name is Chris Hedge. I'm one of the ministers here at Walnut Street Church of Christ, and today I have the treat of guest hosting the Dear Church podcast. And I have the honor of sitting in the seat that belongs to my friend, to my coworker, and to my preacher, Chris McCurley. Chris, thank you for letting me be here today.
Well, thank you for taking over hosting duties. This is you're auditioning because it's going to be a regular thing.
Chris, you have a true talent. You do. You have a gift for speaking and preaching.
Wow. And
your presentation skills are effective. But what I noticed from the beginning was your writing skills, your ability to write your sermons that you will present. I appreciate that good writing. I have said since before we even met, when I started hearing you preach, that your sermons are filled with meat, that you do not have filler, you do not have fluff, but everything has purpose that you say. And as a member of the congregation, I appreciate that. So again, thank you for letting me be here with you this morning.
Absolutely.
As we begin, before we get into the questions, will you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So before that, though, I want our viewers and listeners to know, I didn't ask you to say any of that, so I appreciate it. We had some friends of mine that contacted me and said, "Hey, why don't you be a guest on this series on prepping to preach? We want to hear what you have to say." And so I said, "Well, that sounds cool. Let's just have some fun with it and have Chris Hedge be the host, and I'll be a guest for once." It's kind of neat to be in this seat. So thank you for agreeing to do this.
Yes.
So Chris McCurley, I've been here 2.5 years at Walnut Street. Before that, spent almost 15 years in Abilene, Texas, and thought I was going to retire there, and I was happy there. And then Chris Hedge called me one day with another guy named Matthew Kincaid and said, "Would you be interested in coming to Walnut Street?" And that kind of started the process. But yeah, we love it here. We love Dixon. I'm 3 hours from home, grew up in Paragould, Arkansas, my wife and I both. And we have a new grandbaby with my oldest daughter and son-in-law that live 2 hours from here. So we get to see them quite often. Wife teaches at Lipscomb, and she's loving that. And just trying to get the other two kids to move this way too. But love Walnut Street. This is my soulmate church. Love this place. So
Great. So I want to ask you some questions about preparing to preach. I think the audience, I think our congregation would like to know some of what we don't see, some of what happens from Monday through Friday, getting ready for Sunday. So enlighten us on some of this.
Sure.
As we move from the page to the pulpit.
Yeah.
Okay. So just in general, once you've written or outlined the sermon, what do you do in preparation to present it?
Yeah, it's interesting. My dad even asked me the other day, he said, "So what do you do during the week?" I guess he thought the whole standard line is, "Well, you only work one day a week." Yeah. If only that were true. So I spent quite a bit of time putting words on a page. I'm a manuscript guy. When I first started preaching, the minister I learned under was Steve Norris. And Steve said, "Hey, at least in the beginning, write everything out. You can go to outline later, but when you're first starting out, and I had no background in this. So he said, just write everything out. And I've never stopped doing that for a few reasons. Number one, it's just very helpful when I want to go back and maybe pull from that sermon again. I know what I meant. Or I write for the newspaper here in Dixon. It's easy for me to kind of copy and paste some things and not have to think about what did I mean when I said illustration or whatever on an outline. So that's good. But also those notes are a safety net for me. So I have them, but I don't try to look at them very much, but they're there if I need them. And so trying to get those ideas in manuscript into my head so that I can present it without reading it that's a process for sure. And my process, if we've learned one thing throughout this series, it's there's more than one way to skin this cat. But my process is I like to go over it and over it and over it until I've got it so down that I can say it without really having to look at my notes too much. I wouldn't say I memorize completely. There's certain things I do. I think an illustration's really effective if you can make eye contact with the audience and not read it. So illustrations I always try to memorize. And then key points, I try to have those in my head so that I can convey those to the audience, making eye contact, all that kind of stuff. because I want to be as effective as possible. And I try to have those little tweetable moments. You know, it's X now, not Twitter, but you know, those statements that people can grab onto and walk away with. Like, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. You know, something that people can walk away with, those little nuggets and say, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. I can hang on to that. Yeah. So I just spend as much time as needed trying to absorb it and let it marinate so that I can spit it out.
Okay, I would be interested to know. So you're a manuscript guy,
Yep.
and you mostly memorize. I mean, sitting in the congregation, I don't see you refer to your notes.
Yeah.
So if you were to write a lesson and then present it, how long would it take to get it into your head for you to be able to present it like you do?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes that's easy. You know, there are some lessons that I've done that I feel like before I even sit down to kind of memorize it, I'm like, I know this stuff. And you know how it is. You preach here quite often. When you get up there and you feel like you know the stuff, you just feel good about it. Yes. You know, there's nothing worse than getting up there unprepared. But most of the time, the process is Friday morning, I look over it. I just read over it in my mind, read over it. And then Saturday, I preach it to myself out loud. I think out loud's the best way for me. And then turn around and do that again on Sunday morning before I get up early Sunday morning. And before I come here to preach, I'm doing it again in my mind. And I might even, we have an upstairs. I go upstairs, shut the door, and I put my notes, my iPad on the bed, propped up on a pillow or something. And I walk around and I just try to recite it. And this is the painstaking part of it. And there's a bit of suffering that goes along with it. But as I started out, I want it smooth. And if it's not smooth, I may go back and do it 10 times. It's got to be smooth. And so if I start off and the opening illustration's smooth and I get to, you know, the 4th page of my notes and I mess up, I start all over and do it again. And that can take an hour. That can take 30 minutes, depending on how it flows. But I want to say it perfectly so that I know I've got it in my head. And that is an OCD thing, I admit, and probably not the best method, but it works for me. So
it sounds a little like an athlete who's trying to get something right, wants a streak going, certain number of free throws hit,
yep.
and that kind of thing.
That's my background, so maybe that's where it comes from. Yeah.
So are you rehearse, you practice? Are you also mowing the grass, going over the sermon in your head?
Yeah. You sit with it all week. I'm sure you're the same way. You're tweaking it in your head always. I take great pains to make sure that every word on the manuscript is well thought out. Yeah. And so, I call it being a wordsmith or whatever. I just want to make sure that everything comes across clearly, smoothly, and is communicated effectively. And so a lot of the work comes in the manuscript process, making sure everything is spelled out right, and then getting that in my brain. And of course, when you're typing it out and you're doing manuscript, a lot of it's seeping in then. And so when you go back to preach it, you do have a familiarity with it. The problem with me is I like to work way ahead. And so, I'm working on sermons right now for 2027. And so there are times, this sounds weird, there are times when I have to look to see what I'm preaching this week on Monday because I'm so far ahead. I'm like, I don't remember what I'm preaching this week. Oh, yeah. I pull it up. And then that week, I'm kind of glancing at it, looking over it until Thursday or Friday when I read over it. But yeah, I'm always sitting with it. Yeah. Always trying to, kind of let it just ruminate.
So shifting gears just a little bit, you mentioned I preach some here. We upload our worship services and our sermons to Facebook, so it's out there. You can watch it if you want. Yeah. I'd like to know, how do you evaluate yourself when you have finished preaching a sermon, and do you go back and watch the sermon on Facebook?
I do not. I hate watching myself. I don't like to listen to myself. I don't like to watch myself. I am the most self-deprecating person probably when it comes to preaching, and in a lot of other ways as well. I want to exude confidence. I think that's important if you're a leader, if you're preaching, whatever you're doing in an upfront role. I think it's important to exude confidence. Hopefully there's some confidence being exuded, but underneath that exterior, I'm constantly self-loathing, self-deprecating, and I know that's not healthy, but I have never walked away from a sermon going, man, I could have done that any better. Like I hit that one out of the park. I've never done that. And maybe that's what keeps me striving, to say someday, hopefully. But to use baseball terms, I was a baseball coach. My son was a baseball player, and he was a leadoff hitter. And, my instructions to him were get on base. I don't care how you get on base. You're a leadoff hitter. Who cares? Just get on base. I don't care if you get hit. I don't care if you get a hit, if you walk, whatever. And I feel like in preaching, there's value in just getting on base. Just get on base. Be a leadoff hitter. Don't be a home run hitter. Home run hitters strike out a lot. So I've tried to kind of change my mindset of you don't have to hit home run every week. A single, a double's fine. Just getting on base is fine. But no matter what I do or how I do it, I walk away going, man, I could have done that better. So I don't really have to evaluate myself by watching because I know. I do realize in editing, I do all the editing for the sermons to put them on the website. I have realized lately I say right a lot, and so I've had to kind of consciously work on that.
Yeah.
So I do see those kind of things when I'm editing. I'm like, yeah, that was stupid, Chris. Don't do that anymore.
So preachers finish their sermon and they go to the back or whatever. Do you receive a lot of feedback from the members, positive or negative, about the sermon that you just preached?
Yes. And it's 99.9% positive. Our people here at Walnut Street are just so good. And they know the right things to say. They don't always just come out and go, good sermon, preacher. I appreciate that. But, they're thoughtful in their comments. Rarely do I hear a negative. I may say something wrong or put something on the screen that was the wrong verse, and they'll tell me, hey, just in case you preach this again, you might change that, But I don't deal with a lot of criticism, and maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe I should. I don't know. I'm certainly not perfect, but I think it's a product of our congregation just being very thoughtful and appreciative. This is a congregation that appreciates good preaching. It has for many years, all the way back to, the people we've had in the past, Clarence DeLoach, Steve Baggett. They appreciate guys that put in the work and put in the time. And so they're always very, very kind. This is not a nitpicking congregation, just really, really sweet people.
Good. Are you a PowerPoint guy?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a PowerPoint guy on Sunday morning. So as you know, but our viewers and listeners may not, we do connect groups on Sunday nights for 10 months out of the year. And then in the summers, we take a break. So in the summer from June to July, we have a service here at the building. And even during connect groups, there's always a service at the building. So there's a group of about 170 to 200 that meet at the building on Sunday nights that are not participating in connect groups. And so we rotate that, which is why you preach some. We kind of rotate that around. Sunday nights, I don't use PowerPoint for two reasons. Number one, I want to spend my time doing other things, and that takes a lot of time. And number two, I just think it wears people out. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think after a while it can just run its course. So I'll have a title slide up on Sunday night, but Sunday morning I use it, and I'll have 10 to 15 slides up there, maybe too many, but I don't like to put a whole lot of stuff on a slide. I like to have 1 or 2 points on each slide if I can. And so, yeah, I use PowerPoint. I want them to remember those tweetable moments, lines, and I'll put those up there. And, you see some people taking pictures and, screenshotting it for their phone or whatever so that they can go back to it later. That's good. Most of us are visual learners, and if I can aid that, if I can help retention by putting it up on the screen, I want to do that. So, interestingly enough, when I go preach somewhere, I don't typically use PowerPoint because, fonts mess up because they don't have the update, or, I don't control my PowerPoint. Somebody else in the sound booth runs it. And so I usually don't take it with me. But here,
Yeah. And those who preach and those who teach do know that building a PowerPoint takes time. And so what do you do during the week? If you preach using PowerPoint, that takes time, and you want it to look good. And It's interesting you say that maybe the magic number for slides is 10 to 15,
Yeah.
and you don't want to put too much on the slide.
Right.
You don't want to distract from what's being said. You want it to aid in what's being said. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
You admitted that you are your harshest critic.
Yes.
And so you don't go back and watch on Facebook. If you've done well or not. The congregation gives positive feedback. But as someone who preaches from time to time, I do want to know what's a successful sermon? How do you gauge whether or not your sermon was a success that day?
Yeah. Well, and you do have to gauge it in other ways besides just how you feel about it, because like I said, I'm my own worst critic. So just me doing the evaluating is probably not, I have to admit, not going to give an honest assessment. It's kind of like when I was coaching, fans would get upset when you'd lose a game or something. And I would say, look, you don't want to win more than I do. Nobody wants to win more than I do, so you can be fanatical and all this kind of stuff, but I guarantee you don't want to win more than I do. Nobody wants to preach a good sermon more than I do. As far as the people that are listening or whatever, they may like it, they may not, but I want it to be solid gold every time. And like we said, the way that I would evaluate that would be, was it clearly presented? Did I feel like I was making a connection with the audience? Do I walk away feeling like I said everything that needed to be said for that topic or that scripture that we were dissecting? Did I leave them thinking? That's the nicest compliment you can receive as a preacher, in my opinion. As a preacher, you made me think. And I tell our congregation all the time, it's not my job to tell you what to think. It's my job to make you think. And I want you to think. Those are ways that I would evaluate it and say, we accomplished that. I used to think a good sermon was one that was just well presented. But I think every preacher that's listening or watching this would say that they walked away thinking they bombed. And there's always somebody that comes up and says, that was the best sermon you ever preached. You're like, really? Like, that was the worst sermon I ever preached. But it always impacts somebody when you think it doesn't. And then there's times you walk away thinking this was the best sermon I've ever preached and nobody says anything. And you're like, okay, well, it's crickets. But I think that's the way to evaluate it in my mind, in my heart, is that, this made an impact, hopefully, but I could tell the audience was engaged. This past Sunday morning, I did a lesson where I had a closing illustration that was pretty emotional, and saw a lot of people crying. And I was like, okay, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that at least they were listening. And one of the things that just really impacts me and really surprises me is people actually listen to what you have to say. Not everybody, but there are people every Sunday who are actually listening to what you have to say, and some that actually even want to listen to what you have to say.
Sure.
That is truly amazing to me. Why would anybody want to hear what Chris McCurley has to say?
It's humbling.
Yeah,
it is. You ask for their time, you get their time, and it's humbling that they give it to you.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've preached for a long time now.
Yeah.
I don't know how many sermons, but it's got to be a lot. Can you think of a favorite or two? Do those that stick in your mind? Maybe when you finished writing, you knew it. That's a good one.
Yeah. So I did a series, and I've done it here, called "What Would Jesus Undo?" and kind of a take on what would Jesus do. And there was a couple of lessons in that series. One was on he would undo condemnation, Romans 8. He undoes the curse. Those two, when I got done with those, I felt like, man, this could preach. Yeah. There's a series I did a while back called Fight, and it was on spiritual warfare. That whole series I really enjoyed. And in fact, I love it when I get asked to preach somewhere, like a week or so from now, I'm going back home to preach at a congregation there. And I love it when they say, just bring your favorite sermon, because I always pull from those two series, because I just really enjoy preaching those sermons, because I think they're encouraging and positive. And I think about musicians. Do they ever get tired of singing that one song that was such a hit? Do they get so sick of it? There's a band called Maroon 5, and they did a song called "She Will Be Loved." Sure. It's a beautiful song. Yeah. And their lead singer, Adam Levine, said, I never get tired of playing that song in concert. And I think those are 3 sermons that I never get tired of preaching.
Yeah.
I could preach them all the time. And of course, the nice thing is I have so much that I don't even need notes for those. I can just get up and do it. But yeah, those would be some that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Okay, so for someone like me who dabbles in preaching, for the student who's learning to be a preacher, for preachers in the brotherhood, some parting advice that you give any of us who are looking to be more effective preachers?
Well, I think the first thing would be to be genuine. I don't think it's just me, but I don't want somebody yelling at me from the pulpit. I don't need somebody kicking and pounding, although that can be effective, I guess, at some point. Just be genuine. Don't be a caricature. When I was growing up, the neighborhood friend of mine had a cousin that would play guitar and sing, and he would come over in my friend's house and we'd sit around and listen to him play guitar and sing. And he was good, but he could have been so much better, but he tried to sound like Elvis. He tried to sound like Ricky Skaggs or, Randy Travis. And if he would just sing in his own voice, it would have been way better. So be yourself.
Yeah.
Be genuine, be yourself. That was a light bulb moment for me, sitting in my office one day as a young preacher, realizing I don't have to be Jeff Jenkins. I don't have to be any of these other guys that I admire. I can be me, and I just do that well. So be genuine, be yourself. And I don't mean this to be critical of any congregation, but no is a complete sentence. As a minister, be able to say no. That may be the strongest word in your vocabulary. Because one thing about church people, they'll take as much as you give them and then some. There will always be people who feel like they need you, want you, whatever. And that's good. And you need to be there for them. But no is a complete sentence. You can say no and you can still be effective in ministry. I see too many preachers that get burned out. And honestly, we need to do a better job in our congregations to say, look, if we're going to have a guy preach 2 sermons every week, teach every Bible class, teach ladies' Bible class, write an article for the bulletin, if we're going to do all that, we're going to be looking for another preacher about every 2 or 3 years because we're just burning them out.
Yeah.
And so everybody's got to step up and play a role in this. And, as a minister, be willing to kind of draw some boundaries and say, here's what I need to do to be the most effective. I'm not pushing people off. I'm not shirking responsibilities. I'm just finding balance. And so I would say be genuine. You'll be yourself and be able to say no to some things.
Great. I appreciate that, Chris. Thank you for letting me sit in the big chair this morning. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to let our viewers and listeners know that if you have a question about today's podcast, email me, chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. And maybe you have a question for Chris. Chris, you didn't say it, but you're a coordinating minister. You also work with our youth, and one of my favorite people in the world, but do such a good job in ministry as well. And you're like me. You didn't start out down this road. This is not exactly what you set out to do, but here you are.
Having a great time with it.
Yeah. And you're so invested in this, you moved across the street.
That's right. Literally moved across the street.
Literally moved across the street.
Yes.
Hey, thank you for taking on hosting duties, and thank everybody for tuning in. So until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.